was one of those cases that haunted a lot of people.
It went on for years and we didn't hear anything. I thought they would never find him.
Everybody liked the guy. He had no criminal history, but you never know the monsters who live next to you.
Forensic genetic genealogy has been a force multiplier to criminal investigations.
What a miracle. I mean, it was prayers answered, without a doubt.
It ties together information from the case, circumstantial information.
He did at the time have a white van.
Genetic information.
They found some DNA on her dress.
And genealogical and public record information.
Our lead had 79 grandchildren.
To produce investigative leads. It's important to remember that the forensic genetic genealogy process produces a lead. It does not produce a suspect and it doesn't produce an answer. And so the question a lot of folks ask is, how do you get from the lead to the answer? And there's a few steps to ensure we can translate the investigative lead into an answer in the investigation. The first thing that happens in the forensic genetic genealogy investigation is that we've generated a DNA profile from the crime scene. Once we've built that profile, we do a genetic genealogy search. And that search essentially returns as results genetic relatives to that person based on DNA analysis.
Othram produces a lead to a lady in Wichita, Kansas who potentially is a relative of our suspect. Unfortunately, our lead had 79 grandchildren.
The next step is building out a family tree. We're collecting information from genealogical records, from public records, to figure out how all of these relatives, these genetic relatives we've identified, fit on a tree and fit amongst each other. And in building out that tree, then taking the steps to then infer where our unknown person, for which we've submitted the DNA profile, fits on the tree.
I wasn't sure we were going to get anywhere with that many, if you want to call them suspects.
So there are dozens of grandchildren that we need to consider as we look to see if any can be excluded, and we can further narrow the search for the likely suspect who's left the unknown DNA at the crime scene. When we've combined the genetic and genealogical information, we'll come back with a possible lead. And that lead is generational. So, for example, in a forensic genetic genealogy investigation, if you identify a man that might be the candidate for your contributor to the DNA at a crime scene, if he has a brother, the genetic genealogy process doesn't distinguish between him or his brother. That's why a lead has to then further be evaluated.
In the Carla Walker case, the genealogy led to Glenn McCurley Sr.
So investigators will take the DNA and genealogical evidence and they further then cross-section case information. Are there people that could not possibly have been there at the time?
I get a phone call from David Middleman. Grabbed my binder, I looked at it, I said, sure enough, David, I said, is it Glenn Samuel McCurley? And he says, well, I'm down to Glenn Samuel McCurley, but he died in 1972, your offense is 1974. And I said, did he have a son? David goes, Glenn McCurley had 3 sons, and one of them was a junior.
Maybe you have 2 brothers, and one brother was not alive at the time that the crime was committed, or lived many, many miles away, whereas the other one lived in proximity.
We've been able to identify that the other 2 brothers were not living in Texas at the time, but Glenn Samuel McCurley was living in Fort Worth in 1974.
We're just super stoked that we actually have a good, true lead now at this point.
These things don't identify a suspect, but they further allow you to prioritize and provide supporting evidence for who might be a candidate for being the suspect to a crime. They may come approach the person to even find out just contextually, did they know the victim, just to collect background information.
Glenn Samuel McCurley was one of the Ruger 22 gun owners that was interviewed off of that list. And in April of 1974, he spoke with police and gave them his side of the story.
In the Carla Walker investigation, investigators chose to approach him. They came to his home, talked to him informally, didn't immediately bring up the investigation, but tried to establish some ground truth. Was he in the area at the time?
First thing that we do, we have one of our officers go out to the McCurley home. Mr. McCurley walks out from the backyard.
Mr. McCurley.
I ain't doing anything. I ain't got no money either.
I ain't got no money. I'm a policeman.
It had been many years, almost a half century since the crime had occurred. Had he still been living at that area at the time?
She said you lived here since '78, so you probably got a lot of stuff.
Oh, you wouldn't even believe it.
So at that point, we knew that the McCurleys were the only ones living at this home. and they were there.
And as they developed an ongoing set of confirmed facts,
There's a gun involved in the thing.
Okay.
And it happened to be a gun like I had. It was a Ruger.
they grew more and more convinced that he was likely involved. In the assault and murder of Sheri Jo Elliott in 1983, forensic genetic genealogy pointed detectives to a lead, someone named Ronnie Collins.
Law enforcement went to find him and talk to him. He was 75. He would have been in his early 30s at the time of the crime, so that fit. And he was definitely in the area.
But there wasn't a lot of information about if he had had any known relationship or contact with the victim. And so investigators, much like in the Carla Walker case, reached out to him to see about setting up kind of a general discussion.
I just simply wanted to talk to him at that point. We spoke over the phone a couple of times. He kind of put me off over the holidays, and then we agreed to meet. I waited, set up for the interview, waited around. He never showed up.
He was cooperative in the beginning, much like Glenn Samuel McCurley Jr. in the Carla Walker case. If you are an investigator and you've now received investigative leads from a forensic genetic genealogy process, almost certainly you're going to have to do an additional direct DNA comparison to determine if the person you've identified as a lead is in fact the suspect in your case. There are a couple ways to do this. Sometimes investigators might ask for a voluntary collection, like in the Carla Walker case.
In order for us to eliminate you, the quickest way to do that is to get your DNA. Is that something that you would be okay with?
Well, I think they've already gone through all that before.
He says, "Oh, I did that back then." His wife said, "No, you didn't, honey. They didn't have DNA back then."
Sometimes law enforcement will do what's called a surreptitious collection, or what's sometimes called a trash pull, where publicly discarded items that contain DNA can be compared to the crime scene DNA to determine if there's a relationship.
We took a bunch of those items, sent them back to the lab in California that did the original testing, and they ended up finding a match on a McDonald's straw.
They then sought a search warrant to compel him to directly provide DNA evidence. Because the trash pull doesn't establish chain of custody, that test additionally confirmed that he was a match to the DNA from the crime scene. With this in hand, they felt comfortable arresting him and further questioning him about the crime.
How did you kill her? I just choked her.
And sometimes a combination of these techniques are used. In the Sheri Jo Elliott investigation, the investigators continued to make contact to set up that meet, but he had stopped communicating with them.
I sought a search warrant through the court for his DNA. My partner and I went to his house, and once we contacted his current wife, she told us that the day the interview was supposed to happen, Ronnie Collins committed suicide.
They collected his DNA, had his autopsy, and did that CODIS test in the state lab, confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt that Ronnie Collins was the perpetrator that raped Sheri Jo in November of 1983.
Once the investigative lead is confirmed, and by that I mean the candidate has had their DNA tested against the crime scene DNA and there's been a match established, at that point the investigation shifts. We now have supporting evidence that this person's DNA was at the crime scene, and investigators have to determine why. Were they involved in the crime and likely to be a suspect? And if investigators find that they're a suspect, then we move into the next phase in the investigation, whether it's the warrant, whether it's an arrest, and then the eventual downstream prosecution in court. In the case of Ronnie Collins, the evidence from the sex assault was sufficient for them to close the case, identifying him as the person that likely assaulted and murdered Sheri Jo Elliott. Forensic genetic genealogy provides incredible new leads in so many of these cases that have been unsolved for years or decades. But these are just leads, and so in every one of these investigations, it's critical that the leads are followed up and further supported through additional testings to definitively demonstrate that the person that's identified is the contributor to the DNA at the crime scene and ultimately responsible for the crime.